You're listening to episode 159 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Catharine Hannay joins us to speak about Being You, a Girl's Guide to Mindfulness. If you're listening to this podcast and find value and insights from what is shared here, know that this can only be sustained with your generosity. Please take a moment, go to presentmomentmindfulness.com and click on Make a Donation if you value these conversations, which can't continue without your contributions. Thank you for your help and your support. If you take a look at mindfulness books, there's a lot available these days. Only a few, however, address the needs and interests of teens, especially young women. Today, we get to spotlight one. Catharine Hannay is the founder of mindfulteachers.org, an internationally respected resource on mindfulness in education. She's the author of Being You, a Girl's Guide to Mindfulness, a workbook for teen girls with 52 activities for practicing mindfulness, compassion, and self-acceptance. Our guest today is Catharine Hannay. Catharine, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here. So let's begin by having you tell us a bit about your background.
So my background is a little bit different from a lot of people in the mindfulness community because I actually taught English as a second language for 20 years, and I'm coming into the mindfulness world as a second career from that. So what's been very interesting for me is to watch the development, especially really, I think just in the past couple of years, maybe in the past 2 or 3 years, where a lot more people are talking about diversity within mindfulness, talking about people of color, people from different cultures, different religious backgrounds. And so that's something that I'm very pleased to see that. I think in some ways it's long overdue, actually. I think there's been a lot of misunderstandings and assumptions on all different sides about that, but it's very nice that people are starting to have those discussions and be more open to listening to each other and finding out different points of view about mindfulness.
Mm-hmm. Now, with your background on this is, we were talking a bit before we started recording the interview, has you somewhat uniquely qualified in your background. I'm wondering if you'd share a bit about that, because the awareness of different cultural perspectives, for example, is something that you're very familiar with.
Well, one of the things specifically we're talking about is that I taught Muslims for pretty much my whole career. It's about 20 years of teaching, and there's a diversity of perspectives within Islam, as there's a diversity of perspectives within Christianity, which is the tradition that I grew up with. And for example, my family covers pretty much every mainline Protestant denomination. My husband was raised Catholic, and so I had been aware that not all Christians have the same perspective. But for example, the first time I taught a young woman from Saudi Arabia, I thought, I understand about women from Saudi Arabia. And then I taught a second woman from Saudi Arabia, and I said, wait a minute, she dresses differently. She, doesn't seem to be from the same type of family background as the first person. I need to reevaluate this. And now that I've taught dozens of students, men and women from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, some of the other countries in that part of the world, as well as many other parts of the world, I think that I may be starting to get a sense of what various issues are that Muslims are discussing with each other, but that's only based on what my students have said in English, what I've read in English. Obviously, there's all kinds of things that are being discussed in Arabic or in other languages. So I think the biggest lesson for me is just not making assumptions about other groups. And I know that you recently spoke with Irene Kriegel, who is an expert on mindfulness for Christians, and particularly on evangelical Christians. And that's another issue that's really of concern to me, because I've actually had conversations with evangelical Christians about mindfulness. And when I mention the word mindfulness, I don't know what to expect. I don't know if the first reaction is going to be, oh, Catharine, we thought you were such a nice person and you suddenly sprouted horns and a tail. How can you possibly be working in mindfulness? Or, oh, mindfulness. I went on a retreat at a Christian retreat center and it changed my life. That's so wonderful that you're working in mindfulness. So I think that's just to give a little bit of a taste or a little bit of a sense of the wide range of perspectives, not only between Christians and Muslims or between people of faith and secular mindfulness teachers, but within each tradition. And something that I was thinking about in terms of my own training as an English teacher, there's something that we talk about false cognates in language learning, where people think that a word means the same thing. So one example is like embarazada is kind of the classic one for anyone who studied Spanish. If you say, oh, yo soy embarazada, and you may think you're saying, oh, I feel embarrassed, but it actually means I'm pregnant, which is not the same, and has led to some funny misunderstandings. But there's other words like that. So for example, if I say to you or to anybody with even a pretty basic level of Spanish, if I say casa, most people would say, oh, that means house. Right? That's a word that most people are familiar with. And so if I said to you, no, you're wrong, that actually means umbrella, right? How would somebody react to that? They'd think either like, okay, Catharine, what's the punchline? Or I didn't look correctly, or what is going on here? But that is actually true. The word casa means umbrella, not in Spanish, but in Japanese. And so I started thinking about that in the context of mindfulness. And what I realized is that sometimes we're using the same words, but not meaning the same thing. So when I say the word mindfulness, maybe to a particular conservative Christian who hears that and they think, oh no, that's a Buddhist / Hindu / New Age practice that is not appropriate for me, and that is something bad. Whereas to me, that's, first of all, let's separate Buddhist and Hindu and New Age as all being quite different from each other, and a diversity of opinions in any of those. But the bottom line is I'm saying something that to me, mindfulness is something very positive, and it's something that's appropriate for everyone in different ways. There are nuances of what people can do, but somebody may be listening to that and it's like, I'm saying good and they're hearing bad. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's not because they're not good people, it's not because they're not thoughtful people, but I think because there's such an incredible amount of misinformation online. So if you search, I've done this, like, okay, I'll just do a basic internet search, like Google mindfulness, or I'll do, like, I was looking when I was writing my book for teen girls, I wanted to find some examples of celebrities who practice mindfulness. Like, okay, celebrity mindfulness, search. And I was getting this long list of celebrities. And I was like, oh, this is great. And I'm like, this is kind of surprising that this person or that person or this like incredibly wealthy business person that I don't necessarily perceive as being particularly compassionate, but that's, that may be my bias. But then when I actually look at the articles, it was, oh, this person's doing transcendental meditation, or this person's doing some other type of meditation that is not actually mindfulness. Another thing, when I started looking for mindfulness for Christians, a lot of what was coming up was these blog posts of people saying, "Oh, don't do mindfulness; it's really bad." So that's I was actually very pleased to find the Mindful Christian, which is Irene Craigwell's website, and so that's actually how we first met each other. And she's been very helpful to me. She's done some content on the Mindful Teacher site, and that was very influential for me as well in when I was writing the book, Being You, because I wanted to include the fact that somebody reading it might be Christian or might be from a background where their parents might be hesitant about it, or they might be hesitant about it. And what I was also trying to do was say that it's not only is this okay, but there may be something from your own tradition that you're already doing. So for example, in the section of mindful eating, I mentioned, well, there may already be a time of fasting. If you're Christian, your family may have Lent. If you're Muslim, it may be Ramadan. If you're Jewish, it might be Yom Kippur. Those are all wonderful times to reflect on mindful eating, just as one example. So I guess this is a long explanation of, how does ESL background influence me, but it really influences me in every way I'm perceiving the world, and what other people might be perceiving as a religious difference, a lot of times I really see as a cross-cultural issue, without denying the very distinct theological differences. I mean, people who believe in heaven and people who believe in reincarnation, those are very, very different. And it's important also to acknowledge those differences. Well, I'll tell you about one conversation that was also a very, very interesting conversation. A woman that I know who's a very, very kind, conservative Christian lady was asking a little bit about my work. And it was one of these times where I said mindfulness, and she just went, what the, and she just had this expression on her face, like, I can't believe you just said that. But then, I was really impressed because she just paused for a moment and then did something that most of us would consider very mindful. She said, "Okay, Catherine, tell me about that. Can you explain that to me?" I thought, yes, that's a very thoughtful response. So I tried explaining to her what it is from my point of view, and also mentioning my experience of working with people of different faiths. And after I had explained a little bit, she paused again and she looked at me, and she obviously was thinking about this, and she said, "Okay, I think I get it." She said, "We can either choose to focus on our differences, or we can choose to focus on what we have in common." And I thought, bingo, that's exactly at least what I'm trying to do. And I think, again, I think it's important to share that story and share that perspective, so that, anybody who might be listening to this, maybe they come from a background where they have a negative view of mindfulness, or they come from a background where they have a negative view of conservative Christians. There are so many points where we can choose to focus on what we have in common.
I think it's an interesting point that you make. And for listeners to the podcast, if you're wondering, where have I heard that name of Irene before? It's because it's the previous episode did this one. And it was a wonderful conversation. So I really appreciate that connection, that you and I have this one. One of the things Irene had said in that, I think it was during the interview itself, is to acknowledge, as you just said, and I agree, acknowledge the differences. One of the things in people's different belief systems, we need to do that in order to navigate those waters. And I will just state again, listeners of this and my other podcast will This will be familiar to you as it's just not so to suggest that, oh, all religions say the same thing. No, they do not. If they all the same thing, there would just be one religion. That is not the case. They have very deep divides in certain ideological stances. And what we're talking about here is a practice of mindfulness. The human capacity for it may be different than a Buddhist interpretation of mindfulness, for foundations of mindfulness in traditional Theravada. And that may be different again by what we see in a research paper on a particular kind of mindfulness and what that may be saying. That's great. That means there's a richness of opportunity for different ways to connect to this. So thank you for that background, Catharine. I really appreciate it. And with your background as a teacher for so long and in working with people in different cultures, I'm curious, how did mindfulness enter into this? You said it was relatively recent for you. How did that first show up?
Well, I was totally, completely, utterly stressed out as a teacher, and that is unfortunately pretty much the norm, I think, for teachers these days. And I started looking at some Buddhist books. Actually, my husband had been interested in reading about Buddhism and had suggested some books to me. He had also suggested reading some of what was the kind of beginnings of some of the popular secular mindfulness type of books. So I started reading that, and it made sense when I was reading it, but then when I was in my life, it's like I wasn't really able to access that. And then the book that actually really helped me to put things into practice is How to Train a Wild Elephant by Jan Chozen Bays. And what was helpful for me was I understood the theory and I understood the point and I understood what people were doing, but when I read her book, and then it's try this other thing, see what works for you. Like this week, practice being mindful when you're walking through the doorway, and take that moment of paying attention, which was kind of funny for me because I've heard other people have this problem too, especially when I'm really tired and distracted. I have this problem of bumping into doorways. And so either I really need to pay more attention or my husband sneaks around relocating the doorways when I'm not looking. I suspect it's the former, that, I really need to pay more attention. So I started doing that. She had one that was notice the color blue, just focus on that throughout the day. And for me personally, those type of things, especially anything that's physical practice or visual, were very helpful for me, more so at the time than the traditional types of meditation or breath-based practices. So I started on my commute, said, okay, well, I'm going to start noticing the color blue just on my commute. And I was walking through this neighborhood with these beautiful gardens and realized that on my way from my apartment building to the bus stop, I was walking past these beautiful gardens and I wasn't seeing them because my whole narrative inside my head was, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen in class today? Oh no, 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 no. Oh, we have that meeting. I'm so stressed. I'm so stressed. And then I would be coming home, passing the beautiful gardens again, going, oh no, 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 I'm so stressed. I'm so stressed. And then finally I was like, okay, well, I can take a break for 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the afternoon and kind of look and, try to notice the color blue. And that was kind of helpful. But then I realized, oh, there's not like as much blue in these gardens, there's other colors. And so I started doing something where I'd go through the colors of the rainbow. Like I'm going to look for something red, look for something orange, look for something yellow, etc., and go through those colors and then just start over, and just do that as a practice. Instead of 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the afternoon. And it really helped me to just reduce my own stress level, which is not the only point of practicing mindfulness, but it is something that many people find helpful. And that was really what I needed at the time. And so actually one of the first things that I put on the Mindful Teacher's website was this, and I call it a rainbow walk, and just explaining how to do that. And what's been very interesting, so I didn't know, like, this is just this thing that I do. Is anybody else going to find this useful? I don't know. And that's been consistently in the top 10 posts for, I think it's been at least 6 years, and I've done absolutely nothing to promote it. So obviously other people must be finding this helpful. Then the other really interesting thing that happened was I had put that originally as, this is me as a teacher, this is what I find helpful, you might find it helpful too. And then I started hearing from people who are getting comments or saying like, oh, that was great, I tried that with my adult ESL students and they really liked it. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that wasn't really what I was thinking, but that's actually a really good idea, and I'm glad that was helpful. And then somebody else put like, oh, I'm a mother of 2 young children, and I tried that with them, and they really liked it. And at first, I thought, oh no, what have I done? Because I don't training and teaching mindfulness to kids, But then I was like, well, no, I think that just shows kind of the universality of practice, and shows that maybe my kind of niche in this mindfulness world is because I don't have MBSR training, and I feel more like kind of the mindfulness guinea pig maybe, and I just try something, and if something works for me, and then I started writing about it, and that's really how the Mindful Teachers website developed. And then I started reaching out to other teachers, interviewing them about their experience. And then now I have this wonderful people who've contacted me, have had they've shared some of their activities, advice from people that have a lot of training in very different fields. So that's kind of how everything developed, and it all started with Rainbow Walk. So.
And it is a lovely practice. I mean, just aside from the visuals, is how it really engages the capacity that everyone has to notice. And even those who may be visually impaired or colorblind can connect with, we have 5 senses. Sort of many different ways to connect with being here and really enriching that experience. And for much of that time, it's going to be pleasant experience, there'll be unpleasant experience, and noticing those. And even those unpleasant things, how we engage with those can change our relationship to the experience. So it's a wonderful practice. I'm so glad that you've got that in there.
Well, thank you. And what you just said, actually, if I can follow up on that.
Please.
To be clear, and I also try to be very clear on the Mindful Teachers website, and also in the book, that so it's like the book starts out, the first chapter is mindfulness as a practice, not a perfect. So that idea of we're not, well, everybody has challenges, and it's not that those challenges are ever really going to go away, even just the challenges of practice itself. But you can, as my ESL students, one point I had taught them the expression, practice makes perfect. And they said, oh, we don't like that expression. I said, really, why not? They said, no, it should be practice makes better. I thought, yeah, maybe just everyone, English speakers should just adopt that. It's actually probably a much more accurate statement. But then so in the book, the second chapter is about all different kinds of 5 senses practices. And Ted, as you just pointed out, some people might be visually impaired or colorblind. Maybe colors are not the thing for them. It's just that's what's helpful to me. But there's taste tests you can do, or listening, or all just different kinds of things with touch. But then the third chapter is basically, it's called Stressed, Depressed, and Quite a Mess, because it's that shift that I think a lot of us went through from the beginning of practice. Like, oh, mindfulness, this is great. Like, I don't feel so stressed, and I'm noticing like, oh, here I am having my cup of tea in the morning. And when I focus and I'm mindful, I can really enjoy that more with my little snack. Isn't that nice? Yeah. And then you start getting a little deeper into it. It's like, oh my goodness, there are things happening in my mind that I just, didn't even realize. This, constant churning of just going on and on and on and on, like what it's traditionally sometimes called monkey mind. I actually like to call it ping pong ball mind. It's just going bling, 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 bling all the time. And I think that it's important for adults to understand that, but I also think it's important to be sharing accurate information with kids. And that was one of the challenges for me in writing the book, was I really want to be careful about being accurate, but how do I do this in a way that's accessible for a teen? And I had some wonderful colleagues who I had beta readers for every chapter. I had people, share this with your kids, and trained mindfulness teachers. I had a medical doctor, Dr. Jing Vo, and also Sarah Weiss, who's a kids yoga teacher trainer. Read the chapter on breath-based practices just to make sure that everything I was saying was accurate and authentic. And then I also had some people, for example, Sarah also has teenage daughters, so they read, some parts of the book as well. So I was really trying to go back and forth between what is accessible to a teen girl and not watering down what I was saying or not doing something inaccurate, especially for the brain research. Which is kind of a pet peeve of mine. And I know you probably have more background on the research than I do, but sometimes, well-intentioned adults will tell kids things like, oh, well, one part of your brain can help you and the other, like one part of your brain is bad
Yeah.
and the other part of your brain is good. And so we use this good part of the brain it's kind of like the police that like suppresses the, bad part of the brain. And so I tried to, I was actually like, I'd be reading, 17 magazine to like try to understand the perspective of teenage girls. And then I'd be reading like the brain research and like kind of try to put them together. So I leave it to other people to judge how successful I was, but it was important for me to share the range of experiences and what the research does and doesn't say in a way that's accessible to kids.
And you do that, and one of the things I really do like about the book is that you don't shy away from challenges, because as you described, difficult experiences are going to be noticed. As you develop a capacity for just becoming aware, that's part of your environment too. The external environment, the internal environment has the pleasant and the unpleasant. And so being able to address that and not shy away from it, one of the things, in fact, one of the people you thank in this, Sam Hemelstein, is a friend that we've had on the podcast before, who Sam's very clear, you do need to be authentic and genuine. And you do that by not just focusing on the, oh, it's all pleasant spiritual bypassing kinds of stuff. It's also, how do we work with things that might be more challenging for us? And you do that very well. And I like what you said about the research too, is the amygdala is not a bad guy. Part of functioning, and neural networks are complicated. They're not a perfect match in everything. And science has a long way to go in the study of what happens in the brain, and also what happens in your life. Really, that's part of this, is what are you noticing in your own life? So I'm curious, Catharine, for you, with the background that you had and now seeing how mindfulness was influencing your life, what made you decide to write this particular book, something for young adults, for teen girls? What made you decide to focus on this audience for this particular book?
Okay, well, the shortest version of that answer is I was actually contacted by the publisher and asked for, like, would I be interested in writing a book for teen girls? But that's kind of,
Mm-hmm.
Why did I agree to do that is really what you're getting into. And part of that was because I had such a hard time as a teen. And so I'd been reflecting on that for a while and been thinking about this would have been so useful for me when I was younger, and talking to other women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, saying the same thing. Oh, this would have been so helpful when we were younger. So I really leapt at the chance when the publisher contacted me. And it's interesting that you just a minute ago mentioned Sam Himmelstein, because he's actually somebody that's been really helpful to me personally. We've been working together a little bit over the past few years, and I've done some writing for the Center for Adolescent Studies blog. Had the pleasure of reading his new book in draft form. And one of the things that I really learned from him was about the trauma-informed mindfulness, which is his specialty is working with youth and also doing training in that. And I also felt like, first of all, I wish I'd had a book like this when I was a teen. I was like, oh, why didn't I have Sam as a therapist when I was a teen? That would have been helpful to me. And I think his ability to stay present with youth who are very troubled, or who are, usually because they're very troubled, are engaging in behaviors that maybe the adults don't approve of, but they're not doing it to be rebellious, which is something that some of the adults in my life were very helpful when I was younger, but some of them was pretty much, oh, you're being rebellious, when I was really just trying to make sense of the world, or was really very depressed, or and so when I was working on the book, I really tried to keep that in mind. If I were 15, 16 years old today reading this book, what would be helpful for me? And it wouldn't just be, oh, this is all, happy, and, we're going to have a good time with mindfulness here. That's hasn't been my experience of mindfulness, and that's not something that would have been helpful to me when I was younger, I think. And something else that happened so I started the website in 2012. In the summer, in the fall, my mom was diagnosed with brain cancer. And so during that time, basically the past 8 years, and then after that, we had actually fairly recently, right when I was finishing working on the book, we had a sudden death in the family as well, which is affects a lot of other family members as well. So I won't go into detail on that, but it's a very painful situation. And so that I think really has helped me in a way empathize with youth who may be going through that much younger. And I know that you spoke in an interview I saw that you did on YouTube. I mean, I saw it on YouTube, that your own father had died when you were fairly young. And, when I think about that, like, I'm turning 50 this year. So I mean, I was in my 40s going through this time. It was very difficult for me. I was thinking, wow, imagine for teens that are going through that. And and now that I'm in my 40s, and it's more common. My peer group, people will talk, oh, like, yeah, like you're a woman and your mother died. And, there's that sense that it's still very hard, but there is a group of people that understand that. Whereas for teens, it could be the only kid in their class or the only kid in school who's had that experience. And that would be something where they're not necessarily getting the support they need, or they're surrounded by this peer group that just doesn't know how to help them or what to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in the book, and this is one of the things I really like about it, is it's really filled with not just didactic, not just information about things, but activities as well that are directly related to it. Flower and bubble breathing. When does my lizard brain turn into Godzilla? And wonderful things that are very accessible. And I would suggest not just for teens, but adults too. I will admit, many of the books that I see that are written for a younger audience are just so much more accessible because they get down to the basics of being a person. And a lot of this stuff is still that makes sense to me, right, that we've put this stuff together. So thank you for that. And I'm wondering if there were some favorites that you had, maybe from your own life, that you put in here. You already mentioned Rainbow Walk, but what are some others that you like doing yourself or you like sharing with others?
Sure. The book is really, it's a combination of some traditional practices or typical mindfulness practices, also some things that I do personally, and also had some colleagues share some activities too. So in terms of favorites, I don't want to say everything's my favorite, but different at different times. I find different points. I do different things personally. So I think there's a couple of different things that I'd share, because what I've been focusing on lately is different points of view. And so we were talking earlier about, my background as an ESL teacher and that impacting how I perceive the field. But what I've been working on lately is really trying to empathize with people that I might disagree with, or try to see things from the point of view of somebody that I don't necessarily agree with. And for me, it's actually easier for me to see, oh, well, that person, they're from another country and they have a different cultural background. Okay, I'll try to understand their point of view because maybe I've taught students from that country before. I'm not going to get into at all my own political views, but I think everybody can at least do, the one thing everybody can agree about is it's a very contentious political situation right now. And so I've been trying to think about somebody who disagrees with me politically, what their perspective would be, and somebody who might have a very different background of mine and how that might lead them to have a different point of view. So the couple of different practices. One is just a very simple practice for noticing what we notice. And this one, it does involve closing eyes. And I know a lot of people listen to podcasts while they're driving. So, obviously don't do this now, do this later when it's safe to close your eyes. But if you just close your eyes for just a few seconds and you think about the color red and just go, okay, red, 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 thinking about the color red, and open your eyes and look around. So for me, for example, I'm looking at a bookcase right now. There are a lot of books and there are different colors of books, and kind of the red books just kind of popped out at me. Like, that's kind of what I noticed. And if we take, any other colors, so to say blue, and kind of closing my eyes, and blue, 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 looking around again. And the books that are on the bookcase that are blue, they're kind of just, again, popping out at me. And you can do that. And I call the activity blue, red, yellow, and it goes in that order. The order itself isn't that important, but it's something that I originally developed as a way to kind of introduce the idea of what you see depends on what you're looking for, in a sense. And lately, really just in the past few weeks, I've started doing it as a regular practice, which isn't what I had intended originally, but I've found that it's helpful because of dealing with uncertainty in my life and dealing with, again, this, being in a very tense situation in the world where people have different perspectives. And it's just a really quick way for me to kind of reset myself and say, okay, we're looking at the same shelf of books, but we're just noticing different color covers of the books right now, right? And the other, it's actually a pair of practices that are empathy practices that I've been finding helpful. And one of them is for finding a point of connection with anyone. And I call it 1% similar. And the idea is, okay, like the conversation I just mentioned earlier with the woman who was very opposed to mindfulness or what she had heard about that. But when, she could see, like, if we choose what we have in common, like, we can choose to focus on that. And I realized it's kind of like 6 degrees of separation in a sense, where you can always find some connection to someone. So if I say, okay, somebody who is just off the top of my head, somebody who's been imprisoned, well, I have no idea what it's like to be imprisoned, but I know what it's like to feel claustrophobic. I know that it would be very difficult for me to be enclosed in a small space. I know what it's like to be separated from my family. I know what it's like to be accused of something that I didn't do. I also know what it's like when I really did do something that I know I shouldn't have done and really regret that. So I can't claim that I know what it's like to be somebody who's been imprisoned, but I can at least say, maybe I understand 1% of what it's like to be somebody who's been imprisoned. That can help me be more open to learning from them and open to listening to them. The flip side or companion practice to that, I call same, but different. And that's a common expression in Asia. And actually learned that from my sister because my brother-in-law was traveling in Asia. And so they told me about that expression, which is kind of cute. It's used in a lot of different contexts in certain parts of Asia. But in this context, it's okay. So that person I thought I had absolutely nothing in common with, maybe I do have something in common with them. On the other hand, the person that I think I'm really similar to, or the person that should, like, so for example, my husband, we've been married for quite a while now. And so he should understand exactly what I'm thinking all the time, right? Or he should have the same views about things, right? And I'm saying should as a joke, because of course not, he's another person, he has his own perspective. We have, obviously a lot of issues that we agree about, but we have different backgrounds in certain ways. So if I think about same, but different, okay, what's that different point? What's the point where he's perceiving something differently from the way I am, maybe, as a basic gender difference? So when we were talking about our experiences as adolescents, he had a very different experience from a boy than I did as a girl, and because of different family dynamics and where we grew up and, all kinds of things. So I think that those three practices kind of in combination, to me, kind of sum up where I'm at right now in my personal practice. Doesn't mean they're any better than another practice, just what I'm doing right now. And I also want to mention that because it's not like there's any kind of grading system of, well, this is the really important practice, but that other one in chapter 4, it's just different things resonate with people at different times. And that's actually why there's so many practices in the book, because I didn't want to do, okay, now we're going to do breathing. So here's a breathing practice. It's more like, okay, here's several different breathing practices. See what resonates with you. And then is it going to be helpful for you? And do you want to try that again? Or maybe breathing practices isn't where you're at right now. Let's see the next chapter and let's see some other options and what might be helpful for you.
That's one of the things I like about it. You have several different options. And one of the gaps that I often see in mindfulness books and courses is there isn't a starting point of people just knowing how to check in with themselves and seeing, how am I doing? How am I meeting this particular practice to determine, is this the most helpful one for me right now? And that doesn't mean easiest. It may be one of the hardest practices that you're doing, but it's also one where you notice, okay, but I can still do this stretch. It's still challenging for me, not overwhelming. And yeah, is helpful in these ways when I give it a chance to actually work with me and in me. So thank you for having those different practices available. And I'm wondering, that leads me to a question around, what have been some of the hurdles that you've seen with girls starting out with mindfulness? What are some of the things that you're hearing about, challenges they're running into with this?
I think that what I tend to hear about from, and this is, again, I always want to be really clear about my own background. So I am, again, doing things I do, pulling together things I do personally, and then because I'm not formally trained as a mindfulness teacher, so I'm hearing from other teachers that social media is the absolute biggest issue. I am noticing that with girls that I know personally, anytime if I visit a school, in any books that I'm reading, I mean, everything is about social media. And I think that tends, well, adults and just in general as a society, we don't realize the extent to which that's true. I mean, I think everybody has, it's like this lip service to, oh yeah, social media, yeah, that's different. When I was in high school, we didn't have social media. That's the prime way that young people are communicating with each other is social media. It's the prime way that they're getting bullied in some cases is social media, or the bullying will start at school and then will continue there. So in terms of mindfulness practice, I think that first of all, attention span as with any of us. I mean, I even find myself personally, I don't even own a smartphone. Like I stay distracted with a flip phone and a laptop, and but when we're looking at young people, they have never known a world without smartphones. Like they don't understand what that world is like. And in most cases, even families that are not necessarily very affluent, everybody's getting smartphones. And, even if they're having other, financial sacrifices, like this has just become such the norm. And, I have gotten to the point where I really don't like the expression in real life,
Right.
because it makes it seem like there's somehow this distinction between if you're in real life, like, okay, like put down your phone and now we're in real life. Well, what if you're on your phone, like, you and I, Ted, right now, we're having a conversation over this amazing technology. This is real. This is happening. It's not like because it's on the laptop and we're not in person. So I think in terms of mindfulness for youth, I think adults understanding more about what their lives are like, I think maybe more the challenge rather than the challenge of youth accessing the practices themselves. It's just, I think what's always been the biggest challenge for kids is adults just not getting it, in a sense. Is that making any sense at
Oh
all?
yeah, absolutely. And now it's so strange being on the side of technically being an adult, but still feeling like a 12-year-old inside. And sometimes
I'm not the only one. Thank
being
you
a
for mentioning
12-year-old,
that.
yeah. It's so fascinating because the idea of their cultural context is so very much different in current generational gaps than it was for my grandparents or great grandparents, because the ways in which they communicated and met and spoke, sure, music changed and fashions changed and lots of things changed, but there wasn't this uh, tremendous difference of instant information and anything so easily accessible, and that has an impact. And you're right, that is still real life. You and I are in person. And one of the challenges that I see when I'm teaching how to do mindfulness online courses is the biggest hurdle is the perception that this is somehow lesser, that you're not connecting with other people, that it's not really live, and it is. And there isn't some magic to a third spatial dimension that we have when we're face to face in person 2 feet away. We're still having and establishing connections, and kids are still having strong experiences, sometimes overwhelming experiences online. And that's a very big difference than certainly when I was growing up. So yeah, I think that context of adults, quotey fingers here, adults, understanding that it's a very different kind of culture, and that can be hard too. We need to acknowledge that as well, is that because it wasn't part of our growing up and our makeup, getting to a place of that, I love the way you put it, 1% understanding of what it might be like for the kids is so important in how we might connect with each other again.
And it was very interesting for me because a couple of weeks ago I heard a talk by Lisa Damore, who has a book, Under Pressure, and about teen girls and the level of stress and anxiety among teen girls. And one of the pieces of advice that she gave to that audience was, when you're, this was actually more for parents, it's like when your daughters are, trying to figure out what to do online, we may not actually be able to tell them, we may not actually have the understanding of that. And it actually needs to be sometimes young women who are a little bit older than them, who have the knowledge of what it's actually like to grow up with a cell phone.
Right.
And that got me thinking about something because actually I have a niece who's beginning her career as a teacher now. And it made me realize this is not just the first generation of teens who are digital natives. We actually have the first generation of teachers who are digital natives, and made me think a lot about what's my place in this world. And something that I've started to be thinking about a lot is, okay, I'm turning 50 this year. This is the point in my life where I need to be mentoring. That's really, there are people that are starting out teaching that are, I don't have kids personally, so my nieces, I mean, they're not my kids. I mean, my sister does a great job as a mom, but that's kind of how I think of them in that generation. But then they are also mentoring the younger women. And so I think about my role is kind of supporting the teachers so that the teachers can support the kids. Like, what do the teachers need? And I think that gets back to, what you were asking earlier about how did my own journey start. Really started with my own level of stress and how was I going to try to handle that, and how do I support other teachers in that. And it's a challenge, and it's we're talking about girls and teens in general, that tisk tisk, they're on their phones too much. Well, excuse me, what are the parents doing? What are all of us doing, spending more and more of our lives interacting with devices? And what is it that they're exposed to, and how are they able to come to terms with what they're exposed to? I mean, there's a lot of content online that kids are seeing that they really can't handle, or they don't know how to evaluate. And this is just in my lifetime and in my career as a teacher. We've gone from the teachers having control to a certain extent over the information, to the teachers or anybody who's in a position of trying to help younger people, helping them evaluate what they're looking at. And so I think whether that's mindfulness or whatever you're teaching, any subject, it's how do they know what's accurate information, or how do they know what's relevant? And I think about that too, because there's so much content about mindfulness online now, and you don't know who's accessing what or what their background is. There's a very interesting exchange. Somebody had posted one of John Kabat-Zinn's teachings, and it was specifically about the difference between pain and suffering, and how you can have pain without suffering, which is a whole other hour we could talk about that topic. That I would say is probably not the best place to start as an introduction to mindfulness, but somebody had seen this video and felt very hurt by it and offended by it, because he had recently had a death in the family, and he said, this was so painful to me, and how can you be saying that this is something that I can have pain without suffering, because I am suffering. And it was very interesting to see that reaction. And it was very interesting to see how a lot of other people jumped into that, and they're saying, well, don't you know who John Kabat-Zinn is, and what this, that, and the other, and blah, blah. And then finally somebody had the presence of mind to say, I am so sorry for your loss. I understand that this is very painful for you. Actually, this is what I think he was trying to, say in this teaching. And then other people said, yes, thank you, so-and-so, for making that point, and that it was the people commenting who were themselves experienced with mindfulness getting very reactive about someone misunderstanding this teaching that was taken totally out of context. It wasn't, and this was not something that Dr. Kabat-Zinn himself had posted, or UMass, or anybody. It's just some, random person that stuck this up on YouTube totally out of context. So I think when we're talking about, challenges for young people, in a lot of cases, it's the same challenges that the rest of us have, of just trying to sort through. There's this massive amount of information, but some of us who are older at least have a context for that, and have a context of saying, okay, I understand that this is a video that's taken totally out of context. Whereas young people just, I don't know that they have as much of a sense that everything really isn't equal, because it's all out there.
All equally out there. Yeah, I think it's a general public problem. I'm glad you're bringing this up, because it's something that's come up a great deal, is how does the general public, whatever their age, discern between that which is maybe beneficial information and appropriate to the context that they're in. So John's talk might have been just right in a particular context, and maybe not for this person who is suffering with a tragic loss. So critical thinking skills are important, but not the only answer.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness can be helpful and is not the only answer. And how we can help people discern when they're, say, about to take a class on mindfulness. Right now, we don't have licensure for mindfulness teaching. Right now, we don't have here's the place you go to see what the credentials are for this person. And even then, they're, like as with any other profession, they're somewhere in the world is the worst doctor. And as some comedian pointed out years ago, and someone has an appointment with them tomorrow. Same thing with mindfulness. There are also poor teachers and excellent teachers who might not have the credentialing that others do. So I tend to fall back on a recommendation of notice what, again, this checking in with yourself. What are you seeing happen? Are you being challenged and not overwhelmed? What are you getting out of this? Is there some help for it? And not looking for, I tried it for 5 minutes and it didn't change my world, but what happens like an exercise program? Would you give it a little bit of time first? If it's just, I went to the gym and I worked out really hard for 10 minutes and I just felt awful at the end of it, so exercise is clearly nonsense, that might not be the right approach to it.
Well, exactly. And I think of it sometimes like, oh, people say it's healthy to eat vegetables, and I ate a single carrot once, and I didn't notice that increase in my health. I think that is the challenge is in such a, as people say, this is a button pushing kind of world to say mindfulness is beneficial, but it's not just something where you get the app, which there's some very nice apps. You get the app and you push the button and you listen to the recording, and then therefore you're a mindful person, and
Right.
and with the popular conception of this is that therefore you never have any health problems ever again, and it's just ridiculous sometimes what the claims are, and in terms of evaluating some of this. Well, I sometimes use the Tibetan term yakdung, which translates as BS, because there's, one talk that I went to, the speaker was just going on and on about all these amazing benefits of mindfulness. And while I do sincerely believe in the benefits of mindfulness, I mean, it really was a little bit over the top, I thought. And it's, very kind-hearted, well-intentioned person who was trying to spread the benefits of mindfulness. But she was saying things like mindfulness has been scientifically proven to reverse osteoporosis.
Yeah.
And I thought, seriously? And so I looked this up and I was trying to find out, and I don't know what study she was looking at. The only study I could find said basically, cortisol levels have an impact on osteoporosis. Cortisol levels can be impacted by stress reduction. Mindfulness is one possible way to reduce stress. Like, okay, I can kind of buy into that. But to go from there to mindfulness, and whatever somebody listening to that might be conceiving as mindfulness, which might be like a specific breath-based practice, is going to, reverse your osteoporosis, is just, I think that we know that that's preposterous, but not everybody knows that that's preposterous. Or people do kind of recognize that that's preposterous as a claim and then say, well, therefore mindfulness doesn't really work because people are making these.
That's the whole thing. Yeah, this is one of the points that we tried to make in the Mind the Hype article that through wonderful happenstance I was lucky enough to be a co-author on, is everything you hear is not necessarily so. As someone with a science background and a skeptic background, anytime I hear science as proven, anytime I hear that word proven, red flag goes up for me, because that's fundamentally not how science works. It's always tentative and subject to change as we learn more and improve our knowledge and correct areas where we might not have been as accurate because we didn't know how to interpret the data correctly. What is the evidence? How do we control for biases? All that good stuff. And I think that's a bit of a gap in much of modern education, is how can we tell? How can we, as best as we can, knowing that that's going to be imperfect and flawed, and it's going to change over time. Have the best sort of discernment around what we might know and what might be most helpful to us. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
And I think that's the maybe the issue about education, or like what are we teaching young people about mindfulness, is really what are we teaching young people about anything. And I think what we need to be teaching them about anything is evaluate this, have a sense for yourself of how to judge whether something is true or not, without going to one extreme or the other, without just accepting everything or without just rejecting everything. And it was interesting, it was my dad's a retired computer science professor, so he's talked about in the field of engineering that there's been a problem in recent years where kids don't know how to estimate, right? Because they're so used to using calculator, so they may get to college and not have a sense of being able to estimate. And then if they're working on an engineering project, like, what if your computer or your calculator makes a mistake, or you happen to hit the wrong button, and you're designing a computer program or building a bridge or doing something where you just need to have a sense like, wait a minute, that seemed a little off, that seems like that might not be quite right, let me double check that. So some kind of healthy skepticism. But on the other hand, like you were just saying, you have to also give things a little bit of a chance as well. You can't just say instantly, oh, this doesn't work for me. So.
Yeah. Catharine, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners before I let you go?
I think that one of the main focuses that I have right now is on self-care for teachers, which is something that I mentioned a little bit in my own case. And I want to emphasize with that, as with mindfulness practice and kind of self-care for anyone. And I think there's a lot of overlaps there. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I think that there's sometimes a lot of frustration of, oh, well, I'm really trying and I keep trying, but I'm still stressed, and the stress is going to be there. Right. There are other people in the world that we need to interact with. There's some systems that are not necessarily very healthy. So it's I guess it again gets into that idea of discernment, that I need to figure out, how do I personally navigate in this world? What can I do maybe to stay calm as the, kind of the center of the hurricane, rather than the sense that somehow we're doing self-care wrong, or we're doing mindfulness wrong, because there are still a lot of pressures that we're all facing right now.
Thank you for that. So for those who are listening, again, I will have a link to Catharine's book, Being You, A Girl's Guide to Mindfulness, on the episode page, along with links to her own site and Mindful Teachers. And that's CatharineHannay.com and mindfulteachers.org for those of you who are listening. Catharine, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ted. It's been my pleasure and really an honor to join this continuing series of conversations that you're having.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come and visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.